Hey, before we got started today, I wanted to share some content by other creators who are also covering the towers. If you are hungry for more material, I highly recommend all of these spots. First of all, if you go to 2perspellbook.com, Alexander Cairns has a bunch of great articles breaking down the different pages that you can use at the tower, including analysis of the water tower. Go look at them. I've been testing some spellbooks with Alexander. It's been really great. If you are hungry for long-form discussion, Caster Corner on YouTube has a few episodes covering both spoilers and the upcoming tower. I played one of the members Deadly at the water tower, really fun guy. And Ian over at Cardboard and Coffee has been giving us a much needed boost and is also a host of that show. While the next one isn't exactly covering towers, at least not yet, the PokeZoo Procasters have a YouTube channel now. It's looking like their channel is just going to do really great competitive analysis. They just posted their first video, so go over there, give them a subscribe. Let's try to boost everybody up. Now on to the episode. You and Your Snipe by the Calaveras County Casters. If you've had the misfortune of forming a contract with a snipe, fret not. As difficult as they can be to find, snipes have an uncanny knack for locating other beasties in the wilds around you. Utilize your snipe's power to press the hunt, and tell it what you're looking for. You'll be amazed at what they return with. Okay, let's try this. Snipe, we need to find a cement worm for the Earth Tower. It's gray and brown and worm-shaped. It's pretty big. You think you can do that? Great. Snipe, what did you do? Is that a Sliderock Bolter? Snipe! Welcome back to Towers, a Metazoo podcast. My name is Ester, and this is the second episode in a series where I try to share all of my Earth Tower secrets. Last episode, I talked about constructing a gauntlet. We talked about Tehihan. We talked about Mountain Boomer. I mentioned a page called Armadillo Man. And I gave you kind of a starting point. And if you went in the description, you could see those spellbooks and play with them. And if you did, you'd probably find that with some iterations, they're not very difficult to beat. This episode, we're getting into the real stuff. We're getting into everything I found from the last couple weeks of testing before the new spoilers came out. And the new spoilers are very relevant, but I'm still testing with them, and that will be episode 3. I know if you're here for information, so I just want to divvy it out. So, first thing I think we need to talk about is the Sliderock Bolter. This is a 6-aura beastie. It's a monster. It's got 170 LP and Defender and Stone Skin and Burrow. And the biggest thing is you can use its power to just destroy your opponent's aura. It's really awful. And because it's part of the Cryptid Nation set, if you have not dug into Cryptid Nation, the first set before, in Spellbooks, every set has a Spellbook promo that benefits that set somehow. The Cryptid Nation promo costs 2 neutral and lets you just play any page from the Cryptid Nation set. So, turn 1, you could play an aura. You could play an Aurafact. You could absorb aura your Aurafact, generating 1 of that aura. You could fatigue the aura you just played. You could play the Cryptid Nation promo. You could play Sliderock Bolter out. If you went second and you had a lightning in a bottle, you could use that lightning in a bottle to fatigue the Sliderock Bolter, knocking out your opponent's aura. Now, every turn after that, you're just going to keep knocking their aura out. You're going to starve them. Does this sound scary? Does this sound like something you should fear? Do seasons fear the Bolter? This is what we call Merry Christmas Land. And I'm not talking about the special Terra that lets you play December pages. Yes, that can happen. Yes, that has happened to me. How do we counter it? Well, you could have counter spells, right? You could put Dampen in your non-Earth slot. There's also the second anniversary promo, second anniversary celebrations, which is essentially a counterspell for neutral pages that lets you and your opponent bookmark 1 instead of whatever it was going to do. And I was playing that for a while because I did fear the Bolter. But what are the odds they're going to have their Cryptid Nation promo in their hand, and I'm going to have my second anniversary promo in my hand, and I'm going to be able to counter it? Here's where I'm at. If you get the Sliderock play, if you get that turn 2 Cryptid Nation Sliderock, good for you. you win this game. The odds of that are not high. You can actually figure out what the odds of that are if you go to that hypergeometric calculator that I mentioned before. When we talk about turn 1 plays like this, you also have to keep in mind the play where you just drop a bunch of Tehihans. Like, let's talk about a play that's just as likely. You play down an Aura, you play down an Aurafact, you absorb the Aurafact, you play Cardiff Giant on turn 1, you empty out your whole hand because of course your whole hand are Tehihans, except for that one page, the next page you bookmark. That's a New Year's new beginning. New Year's new beginning on your next turn, and what do you know, a bunch more Tehihans and then another Aura. Maybe you get a couple Cement Worms. Do you see what I'm saying here? And this is a trap that I think people at my level and people who are trying to build experience can fall into, which is just the fear of the God Hand. And a God Hand is a God Hand. You can also have a God Hand. Sliderock Bolter Cryptid Nation play is something you should be familiar with because you can put it in any spellbook. It's not something we're going to worry about here. Let's talk about another spellbook that I added to my gauntlet in the time between, and that's Worms Tribal. So I do want to talk about Cement Worm because it's not that I slept on it, it's that I was skeptical of it and now I play it. It costs 2. It has Burrow. It has Stone Skin, which is really good in a format with Earthquakes, which does 50 damage to all of the beasties with Burrow. And when you hit your opponent with it, if they have a fatigued aura page, you can say that aura page does not unfatigue. If you have 2 Cement Worms, you could do that to 2 pages. Now there's another worm out there, and that's Ice Worm. And Ice Worm is neat because when you play it, you can go look for other worms in your spellbook and get them out, which means similar if you've played the Cosmic Spellbook with Lizard People, where you can just go keep grabbing more Lizard People. You can keep grabbing more Frost Worms, and then you can play an Earth Worm. Especially with the Frost Earth Fusion aura, this is even more playable. The other thing with Ice Worm is if there are 4 or more worms, you get tribal boost for that tribe, which gives you plus 10 LP and attack damage for every other worm out there. So if you have 4 worms, you're going to get plus 30 because it does not count itself. So I added one of these to the gauntlet, and it's a pretty good spellbook. I think it's worth trying out. The issue is just Earthquake absolutely demolishes it, and you can have up to 10 Earthquake. Earthquake is not that scary for Cement Worm because it does not take damage from Earthquake, but it does unburrow it, which allows it to be a target. But a lot of times it's not quite worth it just for dealing with Cement Worms. But with Ice Worm, yeah, that's going to near kill it, unburrow it. You can then knock it out with your beasties. But on top of the spellbooks I shared last time, I wanted to mention that worm deck. So now let's go to the main spellbook that I've been developing and playing and agonizing over, and the struggles. So in testing a version of that spellbook with Mountain Boomer, the first striker, which I really liked initially, and then Armadillo Man just won out. Armadillo Man has 135 LP, which puts it out of destroy range for a lot of beasties. It has Defender, which boosts that to 270 on your opponent's turn, so it can eat a number of beasties before it goes down. It has Paralyze on its attack, which is really incredible. It does 105 damage, which is very respectable. And more than anything, when it is destroyed, you can equip it to a beastie or an artifact. When the equipped page is targeted by an attack or declared as a defender, and that's big, you may place the Armadillo Man into the cemetery and end the combat. So you can defend usually several beasties with it, and then you can put it on another beastie, which then lets you end combat. Now, once again, this is a page that you can only find in the Sealed Blue Man deck, which is the release event deck from Seance. Last I checked on eBay, there was someone selling a pile of those, so go grab them if you haven't yet. You can have up to 4 of these in your spellbook, but that deck is only going to come with 3. Armadillo Man's really good. It's just really efficient. Something I like with it is if you're dealing with a really big, scary beastie, say they're Sliderock Bolter, for whatever reason they didn't burrow on their turn, but more than likely a Cardiff Giant or an Elder Matlocks, you can run your Armadillo Man into them, hoping you get a Paralyze off. If not, you did 105 damage, and then if your Armadillo Man gets destroyed, you just get to put it on something else. The riskier play, and this is going to bring flashbacks with the Wallowa Lake Crustacean from Water Tower, is crashing your Armadillo Man into your opponent's Armadillo Man. If you get the Paralyze off, they're not going to attack back, and then if you can destroy it on your turn, they're not going to be able to equip it to another beastie. However, if you try to paralyze them and you're not successful, they have every chance of paralyzing you back. That's going to blank the page, so any of those good page effects do not apply. Something that I found that's important when dealing with an opponent's Armadillo Man If you have a number of beasties and you're working on clearing their board, attack the Armadillo Man last. Knock out their Tehihan, knock out whatever they're going to try to equip it to. In other words, if you can, make it so Armadillo Man is the only beastie on the board, because then when it's destroyed, it's just going to go to the limbo. Now they can bring it back with Graveyard Mud, but all the same, it means they're not going to be able to just end combat on their turn. You can also hope that they attach it to an Aurafact and then absorb that Aurafact that will also just get rid of it. But through all of my games, I decided, you know what? Armadillo Man's the 3-drop for me. The other beastie that I'd mentioned before, I just wasn't sure about it. It was only doing 60 damage, but that is the Cement Worm. What I found was when I was playing the spellbooks in my gauntlet that had Cement Worm is every once in a while they would get a turn 1 or a turn 2 Cement Worm off. I would only have 1 aura. They would be able to lock my aura down. I really couldn't come back from that, or not without great difficulty. It's not a play that you can count on. You can only have 4 Cement Worm in your spellbook. You're not necessarily going to get it off. But I did find it was worth having those Cement Worms in there for the chance that you had it. Because even then, say you are behind, Burrow's good. As a reminder on how Burrow works, if you have the Burrow trait, at the start of the turn, you can burrow a beastie and they're now out of reach by everything except for potions and some like non-target effects. And keep in mind, if you were to say Toxic Water, a burrowed Cement Worm, that's going to remove the Burrow trait, but that's not going to unburrow them. The Burrow trait allows them to burrow. Once they're burrowed, they're burrowed. You need to do something like an Earthquake or use a shovel to dig them up. Now, there is a way you can play around Cement Worm if they don't get a God Hand. Let's say you play an Aura, they have a Cement Worm, you don't have a way of destroying that Cement Worm this turn. You maybe have a couple Tehihan in hand, and you have more Aura. If you don't fatigue that Aura to play out a Tehihan, they can't attack you and then lock down that Aura. If you have a bigger play in mind, such as your own Cement Worm or an Armadillo Man, you can wait to fatigue your aura until it's an optimal time and you're able to actually establish some board so that if they get that early Cement Worm off, you're not screwed. The game is not over for you. However, if they get Cement Worm out and then they get several Tehihans out, now you're going to have to make some decisions because you can just get overrun if you're not playing any beasties out. So just think of different ways to get around that. One is playing down an Aurafact and then absorbing your own Aurafact that can generate you an extra aura, which might put you in the range of, say, an Armadillo Man. When it comes to bigger beasties that can eat a Cement Worm, such as Armadillo Man, I also really like Elder Matlocks. Elder Matlocks costs 6. It has a whopping 440 LP on your opponent's turn, and as long as a Tehihan's out, it only costs 3, because once again, Tehihan reduces 3 cost off of a giant. Really good, gonna be really big, especially when we get into spoilers in the next episode. But you don't need to attack with your Elder Matlocks or your Armadillo Man. Say you have some board, they have some board. And when I say some board, I'm realizing there's probably some new card members. Your board is your part of the arena, your beasties, the pages you control. So when we say, okay, do you have beasties on board? Do you have a board state? That means that you have a number of beasties, maybe artifacts, etc. You've developed your board. So say they have some board, you have some board, they have a Cement Worm. You want to keep using the aura each turn so that you have an efficient curve. I should probably tell you what aura curve is too. This comes from 90s Magic, where a person in a class realized during a math class that if they played, in this case mana, but I'm just going to say aura, if I play 1 aura on turn 1, and then I use it to play a 1 aura beastie, and then on turn 2, I play a second aura, and then now I've played a 2-cost beastie, and then on third turn, I play a third aura, and then I play a 3-cost beastie, or maybe a 2-cost and a 1-cost beastie. I am playing on curve. I am using all of my aura. If you use all of your aura, you're more likely to win the game, in the case with most spellbooks. It's a little harder in the Towers format, but still something to consider. So you want to keep playing on board. Let's say you have a really good giant you want to play out. You need 3 aura the next turn. Leave your Armadillo Man up. Use your Tehihans or whatever else you have to attack their other beasties. But as long as your Armadillo Man is up, they can't attack you with their Cement Worm. Because at the start of their turn, Cement Worm unburrows. If it goes swinging at you, it's going to hit Armadillo Man for 60. Armadillo Man's going to swing back for 105. That Cement Worm is gone. They don't have a choice. Like, that is no choice. Unless There are two situations where you might want to throw heftier beasties away. One is if you have Graveyard Muds in hand and you want to just get extra effects out of them or deal some extra damage. You have the aura anyways, you can play your Graveyard Mud and then pay for that beastie. The other is Cardiff Giant. I think I might have buried the lead on this because people rarely use it this way, but Cardiff Giant has a power called False Excavation. When you go to attack at Cardiff Giant, it can use this power. Select up to 3 Earth Beasties in your Limbo or Cemetery. So keep in mind, if you threw your Armadillo Man in the cemetery to get its defense effect and show them to your opponent, you may pay aura equal to their total aura cost -1 for each beastie selected in place. Look, this gets confusing. You can pick 3 beasties from your Limbo or Cemetery. They are now the defenders. Cardiff Giant is destroyed and sent to the afterlife at the end of this turn. I really like using Cardiff Giant as a defender in this way. They are going to want to take it out because going back to our original Earth episode, Cardiff takes all Earth Beastie pages you contract and reduces that cost by 1. You can take a hit or 2 with a Cardiff, and then if it's going to die, you can bring beasties out of Limbo in the cemetery as long as you can pay for them, and now they're back on the field. And if you haven't looked into how defending works and declaring defenders, go read and reread that section of the rulebook. Because if you pick your defenders carefully, they have to distribute a certain amount of damage among your defenders, and you can protect all of your beasties. Does this sound like a lot of scenarios? Does this sound like a lot of back and forth? Does this sound a lot like, oh, well, if my opponent does this, I do this, but then if I do this, my opponent does this? Welcome to High Level Metazoo. This is what we're in it for. This is when you know a card game's in a healthy and fun spot. And this is also where metas come out. Oh, if you play this, I want to play this, but if you're not going to play that, I don't need to play that. Getting an idea of what the field is going to play, how you can deal with that. Going back to that worm deck, I don't anticipate worms being huge at the Earth Tower because I've seen most casters play Earthquake. I don't play Earthquake, but most casters do, which means those worm decks are going to run into trouble. But if nobody plays Earthquake because nobody anticipates worms and you get lucky enough, worms can take you to victory. I'm putting Earthquake in my side deck just in case I run into a worm spellbook. So I've incorporated Armadillo Man into my spellbook. I've incorporated Cement Worms. I want to talk about a thing called Aura Screw, term coming from Mana Screw from Magic, which is when you just don't draw the aura you need. Now, I've been running 8 aura in most of these spellbooks. Some people are going as far as to run 6. Some people are doing more. But Earth, I find, really wants the card draw, and it really wants the flexibility of non-Earth pages. And in a 40-page spellbook, you can only have 16 non-Earth pages, not including aura. So if I'm playing 8 aura, I have 8 other slots I can work with. But with 8 aura, even with 10, you can get unlucky. You can have games where you don't draw anything. I don't know too many casters during Water Tower who didn't have at least one match where they just didn't draw their aura. I certainly had one, and it resulted in a loss. But if you walked around, there was a sentiment with some casters that they could just never pull the aura they needed. And then when you examined, they just weren't running that much aura. If you don't run a lot of aura and then you don't pull aura, that's on you. That's on your spell book. And this is where balance is tricky. Because even with 10 aura, you're not guaranteed to get all the aura you need. And then you can run into the other issue of you keep pulling aura over and over again that you don't need. But I got really unlucky during 2 of my pretty lengthy playtest sections, and I kept dealing with situations where I had 1 or 2 aura. So I started getting rid of expensive beasties. I got rid of John Henry altogether. I found John Henry to be a bit more of a win-more. That doesn't mean he's not good, but for me, counting on being unlucky, I want my beasties to cost 1 or 2, with a few costing 3. And when I say 3, that includes more expensive giants that are just not going to pay as much. The spellbook I've been rolling with is just very consistent. As consistent as I think Earth can be. The issue with running a bunch of low-cost beasties is just power. If your opponent is being a little riskier, if they've put more expensive pages in their spellbook and they're able to get them out, if you play it too safe and they don't, you might get overrun. You're at a disadvantage. But there are 2 things I did to counter that. For one, I have a bunch of aura facts. I have a bunch of absorb aura. I can use that to draw pages and generate more aura. Absorb auras have been interesting because I've found most people I've played against have a bunch of them in their spellbook, which means as soon as you put an aura fact down, they're just going to absorb it on their turn. So a lot of times it kind of behooves you to just absorb your own aura unless you have a reason not to. If you can't afford your opponent getting ahead, don't put an aura fact down. It's probably not worth it unless you're pretty confident they don't have an absorb aura. That's a case where you want to be keeping tabs on your opponent's cemetery. That is public information. You can look at their cemetery. If they have 2 or 3 absorb aura in there, you're probably safer. And now my spellbook is at a point where I've won a number of games where I only got 1 or 2 aura out. If the other person gets their cement worms out and they start locking my aura down, it's probably not going to go well for me, but at least I have ways around that. And the mulligan is key. If you don't have a turn 1 or a turn 2 play in your opening hand, mulligan. I know it feels bad, but this is a format where getting a couple Tehihans out early or getting a cement worm out early can really change the game. If your opponent has that and you don't, you're going to have a hard time. Though set 6 might give you some flexibility. Once again, next episode, tune in. But as a final topic, I want to talk about the agony, the struggle, the grind. You play your spellbook, you feel good about it, and then it just plays like trash over and over again. You're like, what can I do? Or you play a mirror match where you're playing 2 of the same spellbook against each other, and it's just not working the way you want it to. And when it comes to Earth Tower, the source of my agony were 2 pages. Bookmark, costs 1, you pull 2 pages, it's really good. Or lightning in a bottle. A potion, play it, awaken target beastie, that beastie gains first strike until the end of this turn. I wasn't playing any lightning in the bottle at first, but then if my opponent got a Tehihan up, and then lightning in a bottle, they could wipe out my board. But then on the early game, say I'm ahead, I went first, I have a Tehihan out. If they play a Tehihan, I'm just going to be able to destroy it. Well, if they play a Tehihan and a lightning in a bottle, now I'm behind. But if you have a bunch of lightning in a bottles, and you don't have any card draw in your deck, you could play those lightning in a bottles, and beasties are not as impactful as they have been in other formats. So you might throw your Tehihans out with a bunch of lightning in a bottles and still not get ahead, or still not take out that big scary target. And now your hand is empty, and what are you going to do about that? This back and forth on, do I run bookmarks? Do I run lightning in a bottles? How many of each of those do I run? How many absorb auras do I run? Is something I'm just not going to have an answer for. And I think you would have to run 100 games to really nail down, like, what ratio do I want to go for? This game has variance. You might build a perfect spellbook and not know it because you get really unlucky. So you don't want to second guess yourself. You don't want to assume that every other person is going to have the perfect counter to your spellbook because it's unlikely, but you need to keep these things in mind. The thing that helped me feel a little bit better is when my spellbook was defeating most other spellbooks I ran up against, is playing the mirror. Play the exact same deck. I mentioned before, I will have 1 deck in paper and 1 deck up on the screen in Tabletop Simulator, and I'll play them against each other over and over again, and I will put some more lightning into bottles, or I'll put bookmark in some of them, and I will see what ratio I'm comfortable with. While hindsight is going to be 20/20 after the tower, and a group of mathematicians could, in hindsight, put a bunch of spellbooks up on a board and be like, well, of course, this is the better spellbook. The more I look at the top 32 of Water Tower, the more I see variety, and the more I see spellbooks that were very similar to my spellbook. There's not necessarily a correct ratio. It's just a ratio that works for you. Is consistency more important to you, or is power more important to you? Do you think it feels worse when your BCs are getting removed left and right? Or do you think it feels worse when your hand's empty and you don't have any options? And just play test, play test, play test. You can get to the Earth Tower and you can get really lucky and clear through things even if your spellbook's not optimized. Or you could have a perfectly optimized spellbook and do really poorly at the tower. You're just trying to put the odds in your favor. Like I did last time, I'm going to put some more spellbooks for you to build off of. Once again, these are not final spellbooks, and they do not take set 6 into account. I'm going to try to make part 3 of this soon, right? I want to test with all these new pages. I want it to be a useful episode to you, but I don't want it to come out so close to the tower that you can't incorporate advice. But if you go to the website, metazooarchives.com, on the front page, they have the native card spoiler gallery. If you go to that, most of the Earth pages have been spoiled. And we know that because if you look at the number on the bottom of the page, most of the Earth pages, they go in a row. There's a couple that are going to shake things up. But at this point, outside of 1 page, I think a spellbook running no set 6 pages can still be very viable. And please read your pages, read the rules, read the new erratas as they come out. A lot of people are not running these pages the way they should be. In episode 3 of this series, we are going to talk about giants. New giants, giants blood. We're just going to be talking about set 6 in general. And that means we're going to be talking about giants and what that means for this tower. Towers, a Metazoo podcast, was created by me, Ester Ellis. The cover art was made by Chandler Candela. Music by the Heatley Bros. More details in the description. Want to say hello? Follow the show on Instagram at Towers Podcast. Send me an email at towersgamepodcast@gmail.com and say hi in Metazoo's Discord servers. Many of the figures in Metazoo originate in indigenous lore, and I think it's important for me to acknowledge that I make this podcast on the traditional lands and home of the Tongva Nation. This game presents us with a rich opportunity to get in touch with the living cultures that surround us, and I hope you can take a moment to reflect on the history of the land you stand on and the figures and the cards you play.